Begin.
Great. Welcome everybody to the August 18th edition of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission Commissioners hearing. We're happy to have everyone on board. It looks like we've got 118 participants at this point. Always glad to see the folks of the state of Colorado taking time from their days and participating with us as we move forward with our role here. So to start, we would have roll call of the commissioners. Hearings Officer Larson, if you could do the roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Boag.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner McGowan. Commissioner Mesner.
Here.
Commissioner Nanjapa.
Here.
Commissioner Putnam.
Here.
Commissioner Robbins.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 7 out of 7 commissioners present.
Great, thank you. Thanks everybody, and thanks everybody for continuing in our Zoom editions of these sorts of hearings. So I want to start by noting a change to the agenda that was posted last week. We had originally posted that we would hear from our sister agencies, CDPHE and AQCC, and as part of that, we wanted to hear about implementation of 181 and the things that they're doing. We also had posted that we would hear from Christy Richardson, the state toxicologist, concerning the CDPHE health study. We have received several objections to us hearing from Ms. Richardson ahead of our COGCC rulemaking on mission change. And while we may still make room for Ms. Richardson to make testimony to us, we're not going to do that this morning. And we will discuss that and make a determination on whether, when, and how to hear from our sister agency that is appropriate for us to hear that information. But we want to address concerns from folks this morning, and so we'll, at this point, postpone that information. With that, so we will hear this morning from CDPHE staff, Sean Hackett, the Energy Liaison, and Leah Martland, the Regular Development and Assistant Unit Supervisor, will present on implementation of SB 19-181. And I believe that we have Director John Putnam, who will also be presenting on other efforts at CDPHE, not the CDPHE health study, but on other efforts. So with that, I would ask Ms. Larson to perhaps unmute Mr. Hackett and Ms. Martland. I'm not sure what your tag team relationship is on this presentation, but we really appreciate you being here, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Chairman. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, Ms. Martland and Mr. Hackett can unmute themselves. So.
And I am unmuted, but it looks like I don't have screen sharing rights. If you could assign those to me, I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation.
Give us one moment, and we are making you a co-host, and you'll be able to do that.
Thank you. I guess we can go ahead and get started while that's getting loaded. Just wanted to introduce myself real quick. I'm Sean Hackett. I'm the Energy Liaison at CDPHE. I work closely with our environmental programs to develop and coordinate our regulation of the oil and gas sector. And I'm joined here this morning by Leah Martland, who's the Regulatory Development and Support Unit Supervisor in CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division in their Planning and Policy program. So let me see if I can pull this presentation up. Can you see my presentation? We're good? Okay. So today, we want to cover CDPHE's consultation on COGCC rules and applications, as well as our own regulatory authority over oil and gas development in the state. I'll also introduce you real quickly to our Oil and Gas Health Information and Response Program, which is a non-regulatory program here at CDPHE. Then I'll discuss how the landmark Oil and Gas Reform Bill, Senate Bill 19-181, impacted our agency. Lastly, Leah Martland will provide an update on air quality rulemaking efforts. Turning now to CDPHE consultations, as part of a COGCC rulemaking hearing in 2008 that was designed to improve local government involvement in the COGCC permitting process and better protect public health and the environment, CDPHE was given a consultation role on a limited set of COGCC applications. These consultations can be requested by a local government. They can be automatically triggered if an operator requests a variance from any rule designed to protect public health, safety, welfare, or the environment, or they can be requested by the director on certain oil and gas development plans or comprehensive area plans. The intent of these consultations is to provide and identify, to identify and mitigate potential impacts to public health, safety, welfare, and the environment. And while COGCC has proposed some revisions to the consultation rule, that fundamental intent remains the same in the draft rules. The consultations typically involve reviewing the relevant permit applications and supporting documents, conducting a site visit, discussing the materials with the operator, local governments, concerned citizens, and COGCC staff. And that information is used to make recommendations to COGCC about best management practices on things like monitoring requirements. We can also recommend that COGCC deny a variance request or deny the application itself if reasonable and necessary to protect public health and the environment. Given COGCC's broad authority over the siting of oil and gas locations, as well as many of the technical downhole aspects of oil and gas development, CDPHE's regulatory authority over the actual siting, drilling, and completion phases of oil and gas wells is currently somewhat narrow in scope. However, in addition to the consultation rules that I just highlighted, our agency does play an important role in regulating and responding to certain impacts to air and water quality, waste management, and public health. Turning first to the regulation of state waters, in 1989, the Colorado legislature adopted Senate Bill 89-181, which amended the Water Quality Control Act to define the roles and responsibilities of state agencies in implementing the different water quality standards for waters in the state. This slide outlines the different roles at a high level, and they're further clarified in a memorandum of understanding between our agencies that's available on COGCC's website. At a high level, what that MOU discusses is that the Water Commission, Water Quality Control Commission within CDPHE, is solely responsible for adopting water quality standards for state waters. In turn, COGCC is responsible for implementing state groundwater standards as they relate to oil and gas exploration and production activities. While COGCC implements state groundwater standards, the Water Division within CDPHE issues and enforces permits authorizing point source discharges into surface waters of the state. They also issue stormwater permits for construction activities that are larger than 1 acre in size. While COGCC's stormwater program applies throughout the lifetime of the well, all the way from construction through final site reclamation, the Water Division's only applies to the construction phase, and our agencies complement each other, with both of us looking for similar best management practices in order to control stormwater erosion and sediment runoff from the site. Our agencies share responsibility for responding to spills and releases to surface water, and a detailed description of this shared responsibility can be found in another memorandum of understanding that's also linked here on the slide if you wanted to dive into that a little bit further. In terms of what the Water Division is doing as part of their regulatory efforts, in July of this year, they adopted a new policy to reduce the use of PFAS substances, PFAS compounds. Those are human-made substances that don't occur naturally in the environment. Toxicity information suggests that exposure to some PFAS compounds can cause a range of negative health outcomes. These compounds have been used for decades in a variety of different products, including some firefighting foams used at refineries, military bases, airports, oil and gas sites, and other facilities. Among other things, that policy will require wastewater treatment plants and industrial sites to monitor these chemicals, and it also will provide CDPHE with clear guardrails for setting wastewater discharge permit limits for PFAS in the future. Although that policy doesn't specifically require oil and gas companies to monitor for PFAS, future regulatory efforts based on this policy could potentially lead to that. And importantly, the policy does contain useful information about EPA verified analytical methods for measuring these compounds. Also, on August 10th of this year, the Water Commission adopted revisions to Regulation number 84, which would allow reclaimed water to be used for oil and gas development for the first time in this state. This was a consensus proposal that was supported by a robust stakeholder process that lasted for over a year, and COGCC staff participated in that stakeholder process, and their technical expertise was crucial in helping us get it over the finish line. That rule will preserve Colorado's freshwater resources, and it contains monitoring and reporting requirements, as well as best management practices to protect public health and the environment and worker safety. Turning now to the waste management program at CDPHE. As you're aware, the exploration and production of oil and natural gas can produce a variety of different waste products that require management. Examples are contained here on the slide. We have drilling muds, drill cuttings, produced water, flowback, and T-norm. Consistent with federal requirements, Colorado regulates these wastes as solid waste and not as hazardous waste. Our agencies share authority over exploration and production waste management or disposal at Class 2 injection well facilities, and that shared authority is outlined in another MOU, which is linked here on the slide and available on COGCC's website. What that MOU discusses is that these wastes are regulated either by COGCC or by CDPHE's Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division, depending on where they're located. At primary field operations, during transport, and at producer-owned or non-commercial treatment sites, they're regulated by COGCC. Once those wastes enter a commercial treatment facility, they're regulated by the solid waste program at CDPHE. And they're also engaged in some rulemaking activities right now. Currently, they're undertaking a rulemaking process to ensure the safe management of T-norm from a variety of industrial sectors, including the oil and gas industry. And again, COGCC staff participated in that stakeholder process. We were very grateful to have them along with that. Pretty soon, the division will be requesting a rulemaking hearing. They'll request that hearing be set for November 18th of this year. Turning now to the regulation of air quality, as with any other industrial facility, oil and gas facilities are regulated by CDPHE's Air Pollution Control Division if they emit pollutants above certain thresholds. The Air Division serves as full-time professional staff for the Air Quality Control Commission, which oversees Colorado's air quality program in accordance with the Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act. The Air Division develops regulations, issues permits, implements an air quality monitoring program, both ambient stationary monitors throughout the state, as well as our mobile monitoring laboratory. They also conduct inspections to verify compliance and enforce regulations. This slide here outlines some of the primary oil and gas related regulations that the Air Commission has adopted over the years. They've been adopting significant oil and gas related regulations since the early 2000s. Their permitting regulation can be found in regulation number 3. Regulations number 6 and 8 incorporate federal requirements, including emissions limits and work practices for certain equipment at oil and gas sites. And our big regulation, one of our big regulations is regulation number 6, first state in the nation to enact regulations requiring oil and gas companies to detect and reduce methane emissions And these requirements are contained in Regulation Number 7, which has served as a national model informing other state and federal requirements. That regulation has been revised through several rulemaking since 2014, and most recently in December of 2019, which Leah will discuss some of those recently adopted revisions. At a high level, what Regulation 7 requires is the use of good air pollution control practices at oil and gas facilities. It also contains emission control requirements for certain pieces of equipment, including storage tanks and pneumatic controllers. And lastly, a critical component of Regulation Number 7 is the Comprehensive Leak Detection and Repair, or LDAR program, for oil and gas production facilities. Other approved instrument monitoring. At the bottom of the slide there, you will see Regulation Number 22 of this year as part of our efforts to accomplish the state's bold greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. Regulation Number 22 builds upon federal reporting requirements, and it will require many industrial sectors, including oil and gas, to report their greenhouse gas emissions to CDPHE starting in 2021. And just a note about an upcoming meeting this afternoon, the Greenhouse Gas Strategy Subcommittee of the Air Commission, they're meeting later today at 1 to identify mitigation strategies and estimated emission reductions. It will address a number of different sectors, including oil and gas, electricity, building, and transportation. If you have time this afternoon, you may want to tune into that. Otherwise, that presentation will be posted afterwards on the Air Commission's website. And I'll also make sure to send Director Murphy an update once that presentation wraps up this evening. This slide here is some air quality resources that you might find useful in your role as commissioner. I won't go over all of them, but the main one at the top there, that's the Air Quality Control Commission website. That's where you will find their rulemaking calendar. You'll find their regulations, their hearing documents and presentations. You can also find the recordings of their hearings and their subcommittee meetings after they've been posted. And then the last one, second to last one on that list, is the Air Division's email list, which you might find useful. They have an oil and gas regulatory update email list that I would encourage you all to sign up for. And now that I briefly outlined CDPHE's regulatory programs, I wanted to highlight our Oil and Gas Health Information and Response Program, which was launched in October 2015 at the recommendation of then Governor Hickenlooper's Oil and Gas Task Force. That program is a collaboration between the Toxicology and Environmental Epidemiology Office and the Air Pollution Control Divisions at CDPHE. It coordinates closely with COGCC staff to track, investigate, and respond to public health concerns. That program includes experts in oil and gas operations, air quality measurement, toxicology, and health communication. Both of our agencies, COGCC and CDPHE, respond to complaints from the public. Public can report concerns about things like noise, traffic, light, and even odors to COGCC, and they can report health concerns to CDPHE's Oil and Gas Health Information and Response Program. Since that program was launched back in 2015, it's received over 900 concerns from the public, and as part of the complaint investigation process, that program may collect air samples using a variety of different technologies, including SUMA canisters, which are vacuum actuated short-term grab samples, as well as our more comprehensive Colorado Air Monitoring Mobile Laboratory, or the CAML. And our CAML, we have one of these CAMLs. It's a very sophisticated piece of equipment that can continuously measure a variety of oil and gas related pollutants, including natural gases like methane and propane, greenhouse gases like carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds, and ozone. The Oil and Gas Program, Health Program takes these air samples and assesses them against health guideline values to better understand potential risks. This slide has the program's website where citizens can report concerns to, and it also has the results of all of the program's community investigations since 2015, as well as the 2019 Human Health Risk Assessment for oil and gas operations in the state, as well as a very useful fact sheet that discusses what that study does and doesn't tell us. In terms of results or what that program has found, other than one sample that detected benzene in excess of health guideline values near the Bella Romero Academy in Greeley, all of the samples that have been collected by that program have been below health guideline values. But it's important to note that among the limitations of our investigations and that conclusion is that these assessments, this conclusion is only limited to the compounds that were measured, as well as the time period and the location at which samples were collected. So while our investigations have only uncovered one instance of sampling in excess of health guideline values, there's a lot that we still don't know about the impacts of oil and gas development. There are gaps in our knowledge, gaps in research, and these gaps must be filled. Air monitoring and health risk assessment has to continue to better assess potential for community-wide health impacts. Now that I've outlined CDPHE's regulatory programs and non-regulatory programs that are responsible for responding to the impacts of oil and gas development, I wanted to briefly touch upon Senate Bill 181 and how it impacted the work that CDPHE does. So first, in addition to substantial changes to the COGCC requiring the prioritization of public health and environment and the expansion of local government authority to regulate the surface impacts of oil and gas development, Senate Bill 181 contains several provisions that are relevant to CDPHE. First, it amended the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Act to clarify that nothing in that act alters, impairs, or negates the authority of our various CDPHE's boards and commissions to regulate certain aspects of oil and gas operations. Additionally, in order to help COGCC fulfill its new mission, one of the rules Senate Bill 181 specifically tasked COGCC with adopting is the cumulative impact rule. And specifically what Senate Bill 181 required was that COGCC adopt rules in consultation with CDPHE to evaluate and address the potential cumulative impacts from oil and gas development. We've met frequently with COGCC since Senate Bill 181 was signed into law, and we've provided our input on a number of their draft rules, including their cumulative impacts rule. In addition to revising the Oil and Gas Conservation Act to clarify CDPHE's authority and requiring COGCC to adopt cumulative impacts rules in consultation with CDPHE, Senate Bill 181 amended the Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act, and it specifically required the Air Quality Control Commission to adopt rules to minimize emissions of methane and other hydrocarbons, volatile organic compounds, and oxides of nitrogen from oil and gas facilities. It directed the Air Commission to review its oil and gas rules and specifically consider adopting more stringent regulations, including semi-annual leak detection at exploration and production facilities, inspection and maintenance requirements for transmission pipelines and compressor stations, continuous methane monitoring at large emitting facilities, multi-well facilities, and facilities in close proximity to occupied dwellings. Senate Bill 181 also clarified that notwithstanding the grant of authority to COGCC in the Oil and Gas Conservation Act, the Air Commission may regulate the pollution from oil and gas facilities, including during pre-production activities such as drilling and completion. Implementing Senate Bill 181 will be a multi-phase iterative process requiring several rulemakings over the coming years. The rulemaking that was completed by the Air Commission in December of 2019 was just the first step in that process. And it's important to note that it is part of our efforts to implement Senate Bill 181 are part of a larger effort to reduce emissions throughout the state. In addition to Senate Bill 181's mandate to minimize emissions from oil and gas operations, the Air Commission is also tasked with combating global climate change through greenhouse gas emission reductions as required in House Bill 19-1261. That bill requires greenhouse gas reductions from a 2005 baseline, 26% by the year 2025, 50% by the year 2030, and 90% by the year 2050. The Air Commission is also tasked with bringing the Front Range into compliance with health-based ozone standards, addressing regional haze, and reducing nitrogen deposition in Rocky Mountain National Park. So now that we have a better understanding of the different programs and regulatory authorities of CDPHE and how Senate Bill 181 impacted the work that we do, I wanted to go ahead and hand this presentation over to Leah Martland, who can provide an update from the December 2019 rulemaking, as well as an update on the direction the Air Commission is currently taking with respect to implementing Senate Bill 181.
Thank you, Mr. Hackett. Really appreciate the overview of all of these topics. Before we move to Ms. Martland, does any commissioner have questions for Mr. Hackett over this overview? Commissioner McGowan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe this will happen in the second part of the presentation. I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about what the commission has put in place to continue to collect air data and monitoring data, and whether or not it's going to be required at certain sites or all sites, and how that might fit into us working together to figure out cumulative impacts, baseline, etc.
And Commissioner McGowan, just to be clear, are you referring to the provisions in the draft 300 series rules concerning cumulative impacts and the air quality resource data that operators are required to submit?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we are, those draft rules did just come out yesterday evening, so we're still in the process of reviewing those, but looking at the newest draft, it makes a nice attempt to try and align the data gathering efforts that COGCC staff is undertaking, making sure that that information is useful not just to COGCC to evaluate and address cumulative impacts in consultation with CDPHE, but also in order to allow CDPHE to use some of that information as part of our greenhouse gas emission reduction efforts and part of our ozone non-attainment efforts. So I think it does a good attempt at that, and we'll have to take a deeper look at the most current draft to better figure out how to make sure we're aligning and syncing up and making sure that we're getting useful information that's useful to the public, to COGCC, and to CDPHE.
And Commissioner McGowan, this is Commissioner Putnam. Real briefly, Leah Martland will talk about some provisions that are proposed in the Air Quality Control Commission's rule that will be considered next month, that considers monitoring for a number of sources, and then we'll talk about longer-term monitoring and other approaches beyond that, including Senate Bill 20-204, which passed the legislature, and I'll talk about that briefly after Leah gives her presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Putnam, for that. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Hackett at this point? Otherwise, we can move to Ms. Martland. I'm not seeing any other questions. Ms. Martland, we look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you, Sean, for the very thorough overview. I do pretty much just air, so it's always interesting to hear some updates as to what's going on with some of the other environmental programs. As Sean said, I am with the Planning and Policy Program in the Air Division, so I just want to reiterate that while the division is staff to the Commission, I do not speak for the Air Commission. They have their technical secretary and their policy advisor that would be speaking for them. So I am presenting from the standpoint of the division, who is more often than not the proponent of rule revisions before the Air Quality Control Commission to their regulations. So as Sean mentioned, the Air Commission has been adopting oil and gas related requirements since the early 2000s. 2004 was a big year for early action ozone compact to try to get additional reductions to help the ozone non-attainment area and to get it into attainment. And so those efforts have continued over the past 15, 20 years. As Sean mentioned, the latest iterations to the oil and gas provisions were adopted in December 2019 in Reg 3 and Reg 7. And he highlighted on this slide a number of the provisions that were adopted. Regulation 3 is our APEN, air pollutant emission notification and permitting regulation. And while those provisions do apply to all sources, there are some specific elements related to oil and gas, including a oil and gas permitting deferral. So previously, oil and gas would submit their permit applications after the first 90 days of production, although those terms have been updated to be more accurate to our processes. And that provision was removed from the regulation such that these facilities now will submit a permit application, and we have 2 general permits that they can use if they want, prior to beginning their operations. So that was an earlier move up in their permitting process. For some of the control strategies, which is what Regulation 7 primarily does, we did increase the requirements, the stringency of the requirements for storage tanks, and that includes crude oil, condensate, and produced water tanks. And we look at tanks a little differently than EPA does in their NSPS, in that we used different thresholds, a lower threshold, and look at a tank battery. So Regulation 7 actually addresses quite a few more tanks than EPA's regulations in their new source performance standards. We also increased the LDAR, leak detection and repair inspection frequency for both well production facilities and natural gas compressor stations. And this was one of the provisions that was proposed in response to some of the directives in Senate Bill 19-181. The program is built on a tiered frequency, so depending on the emissions at the facility, that will dictate what their inspection frequency is. So we proposed and the Commission adopted moving up the minimum inspection frequencies, removing the annual and one-time inspections to a semi-annual base for these operations on a statewide basis. We expanded the pneumatic controller inspection and enhanced response program. This had been adopted in 2017 and was specific to operations in the ozone non-attainment area, would require operators to inspect their pneumatic controllers for proper operation. Many of these devices are designed to have emissions, and that doesn't mean that they don't benefit from ongoing maintenance. And so the operators would inspect those pneumatic controllers during their LDAR inspections and determine whether they were operating properly. So that was expanded from just non-attainment area applicability to a statewide application. One of the other pieces that was in response to Senate Bill 19-181 is a new performance-based program related to the natural gas transmission and storage segment. So these are the segment that is after the natural gas processing plant, but before the distribution segment. Regulation 7 up until 2019 hadn't had requirements specific to this segment. So this was a program that was developed through a stakeholder process directed by the Air Commission out of the 2017 rulemaking, and is a fairly innovative program, and we're excited to be implementing it. It requires the natural gas transmission and storage segment to gather their emissions data and report it such that a methane intensity target can be set for the segment as a whole, Colorado specific target. It is based on a voluntary EPA program, One Future, if you've heard of that. So the concept is based on that and requires operators to implement best management practices to reduce their emissions to, again, as a segment, meet this methane target. And then beyond the national, the transmission and storage segment, we also proposed and the Commission adopted oil and gas inventory reporting requirements for the other operations, at and upstream of gas plants. And so those 2 programs will be gathering information on CO emissions, carbon monoxide emissions, methane, ethane, VOCs, and NOx. So from that will be from all operations, and it's a pretty broad program. It is in addition to the emissions information that is reported through our APEN system, in that it is more broad and does not include the same APEN de minimis thresholds. So that was some of the pieces that the Commission adopted in December. Next slide, please. The proposed revisions that are before the Commission, the Air Commission currently continue to build on some of those elements and continue to take steps to address the directives for the Commission to review their rules out of Senate Bill 19-181. The Air Commission will be hearing these proposed revisions in September. So we are in the formal rulemaking process right now. Breaks out into essentially two buckets of revisions, one related to engines and the other related to primarily oil and gas pre-production, with some additional clarifications and elements related to disposal well facilities. Next slide, please. For the engines, we are proposing to require the engines that are natural gas fired engines that are greater than 1,000 horsepower to reduce their emissions. This would apply to both existing and new engines, and it would apply statewide. As Sean mentioned, that many of our proposals have many purposes and multi-purpose. So this proposal will not only reduce ozone precursors in the non-attainment area as well as in the rest of the state, but it will also reduce visibility impairment pollutants and reduce regional haze at our Class 1 areas. These are some of the national parks and wilderness areas. Colorado has 12 of them around the state. And it will also reduce emissions that lead to nitrogen deposition in Rocky Mountain National Park. So this is definitely a multi-purpose proposal. It will require operators to either meet emission limits on a per engine basis or submit an alternative company-wide compliance plan such that the engines in their plan reduce emissions to the same or better degree as they would on a per engine basis. Next slide, please. This proposed revision related to monitoring is a step to respond to Senate Bill 19-181. We are proposing to require operators of pre-production operations to monitor air quality prior to pre-production for a few days, and then during pre-production, and then early production. So we are proposing 6 months of early production, which would be after the last well is essentially up and running. So pre-production we are defining as drilling through flowback. So drilling, fracking, drill out, and then the flowback. And we are not proposing that a specific technology must be used. This is going to be a flexible program. Operators will submit an air quality monitoring plan specifying the pollutants that will be monitored, the technology that will be used, additional details related to that technology, such as sighting and measurement and data logging ability. And then the operators will submit monthly reports to the division, compiling the results of that monthly monitoring. And this will apply statewide. There's quite a bit of discussion going on through the formal rulemaking process about this program. So we'll see how it continues to refine going into the hearing. Next slide. Also related to pre-production, we are proposing to require operators to reduce emissions from their flowback vessels. So during, as you all are fairly well familiar with, during the completion and pre-production time period, different vessels may be used than the permanent production storage tanks. Under EPA's NSPS, the storage tank control requirements do not apply to what EPA calls well completion vessels. So we are expanding on some of those baseline requirements to require operators to control their emissions from their flowback vessels. This will also is being proposed to apply statewide. Next slide, please. Not related to pre-production directly, we are proposing to clarify for the Class 2 disposal well facilities. These are the facilities that are injecting some of the production fluids. That the storage tanks at these facilities are subject to control requirements, and also expanding the hydrocarbon liquids loadout control requirements that are adopted by the Air Commission in December, which require operators to control the emissions from the transport vehicle. So when the product is loaded into the transport vehicle, emissions may come from the transport vehicle. So the requirements are to control those either by routing them back to the storage tanks or to combustion units. And so these requirements don't currently apply to the Class 2 disposal well facilities that may be skimming off of the liquids for sale. And so we are proposing to expand those to these facilities as well. Next slide, please. And then related to reporting, I mentioned the reporting programs that were adopted by the Air Commission in December. We are proposing to expand those to include CO2 and N2O, the other two greenhouse gas pollutants that factor into the CO2e calculation. That expansion is proposed to be included in 3 areas of the regulation: for transmission and storage, for at and upstream of the natural gas processing plants, and for the well maintenance and well load out provisions. And so we will be gathering that information to help inform a number of efforts. These reporting programs were proposed and adopted to gather information related to ozone, greenhouse gases, as well as to potential emission reduction strategies. And so this will give us an additional data point to help with all 3 of those goals. I think that might be my last slide. Yes, so the rulemaking that we are in right now will be heard in September. You can find those documents on the Air Commission's website. The latest draft of the Regulation 7, the proposed Regulation 7, can be found with the Air Division's pre-hearing statement. Rebuttal statements are due next week, and we will likely have an updated draft attached to our rebuttal statement for the Air Commission and the parties to review. So you'll see there's various highlights in those drafts if you take a look that show some of the changes since the request for hearing. And we will see what happens next month with that with the Air Commission.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martland. I really appreciate the detailed slides and your presentation. Okay, good. Now I can see everybody, now that we're not screen sharing. Commissioners, do we have any questions for Ms. Martland? If you just want to unmute yourselves all. Okay, seeing none. I think next on our agenda, we were gonna, Mr. Director Putnam, I believe we were gonna hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Leah and Sean, for getting us started. Actually may just pick up on one of the points that Leah made, and then Commissioner McGowan's question related to monitoring and the kind of acquisition of additional data. So that's a top priority for the division and the department right now, is to better gather information, better use information about emissions, all the way from a particular point on a source all the way to kind of basin-wide and statewide emissions. And so in addition to the efforts that Leah mentioned and the rulemaking that's coming up this month, we have a few different tools. So your predecessors on the volunteer commission approved a settlement with Occidental Petroleum related to the Firestone tragedy that provides substantial new resources for us to be able to, for example, acquire a mobile monitoring van, which we'll be able to use to do deeper and more detailed investigations beyond the CAMEL unit that Sean had mentioned. Also will allow us to do additional aerial surveys, some of which have started, so that we'll have additional information to better characterize emissions across the area and also find emitters faster. Also use satellite, other sort of emissions, and then had mentioned the legislature passed and governor signed our top legislative priority from last year, Senate Bill 20-204, that includes additional resources for us to have more inspectors, more folks to be able to actually go out and characterize the emissions, and then also authorize the creation of a new air quality enterprise, whose focus will be generating a lot of the basic science about emissions levels, about emissions technologies, about monitoring, so that we can continue to do a better job, have a richer set of information, and make better decisions over time with that information, knowing that, you know, with more than 50,000 wells out there and leaks that could happen anywhere, this is one of the toughest places for us to characterize emissions. We've been making adjustments to our greenhouse gas inventories based on new and additional information, not only from our sources, but also from the research community, much of which is centered in Colorado. And that's a process that we expect to continue and accelerate off into the future. One other thing that Senate Bill 204 will do for us is provide us ability to raise fees and automatically increased fees for this upcoming year, to allow us to add the permit writers, inspectors, enforcement people, and others to kind of keep up with past growth in this sector. We're behind, and with the downgrade of our ozone attainment status to Sirius earlier this year, it's increasing the workload there, and we just need resources to catch up. So as this fiscal year continues, we'll have more ability to do that and kind of really dig in. Obviously, the current financial situation delays some of that, just because I think everything is struggling right now. But you know, we're looking forward to kind of picking that up as quickly as we can. Kind of looking out in the future, as Sean noted and Lee also flagged, you know, the rulemaking that's on the docket for this month is a great step forward. The December rule was a great step forward. Neither of them reflect an endpoint by any means. We have a lot of work to do to implement Senate Bill 181, House Bill 1261, the other laws and rules that were mentioned, as well as to attain our ozone status. So as Sean mentioned, we do have a meeting of the Air Quality Control Commission Subcommittee on Greenhouse Gases this afternoon. One of the key purposes of that meeting is to continue a conversation that we've been having with them about what a regulatory program to achieve the substantial reductions in greenhouse gases needs to look like in order to meet the targets, a 26% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2025, 50% reduction by 2030, and a 90% reduction by 2050. You know, what does that look like, both from a kind of big picture perspective, which we've been taking a look at through the roadmap process, but also a kind of regulation by regulation review to try to understand, you know, how should we prioritize rulemakings at the Air Quality Control Commission for next year? How do we set up processes to make sure that we're on track and can make appropriate adjustments looking forward? It won't come as a surprise to you, especially coming after the rulemaking that you had on mill levy fees, that crystal ball is a little murky right now in terms of both the general economy as well as oil and gas activities. You know, we're trying to manage trajectories against this uncertain future, but for us, it's, you know, remains a top priority to keep as busy as we can within existing resources to meet those reductions. So as part of that, we're going to be laying out a plan for AQCC this afternoon that we believe will provide the rulemakings that we need, as well as some areas of additional legislative resources to meet those targets with a buffer that would allow us to hit the state's greenhouse gas targets. A critical part of that will be continued and deep reductions in the oil and gas sector. Just as context, we're well on our way, and a big focus of the last year has been reductions in the electricity sector. You know, we're looking at, you know, 50% plus reductions by 2025 and 80+% reductions by 2030. We need to have big reductions in the other sectors as well: transportation, buildings and structures, and then oil and gas and other industry. Oil and gas is one that we also know that we need deep reductions in order to meet our ozone targets. Anyone paying attention to the news this summer will see, you know, despite reductions, we're still not hitting our ozone standards, and therefore will need further reductions in the transportation sector, in the industrial sector, but particularly the oil and gas sector, which remains our #1 source of volatile organic compound emissions, as well as a very close to top source of oxides of nitrogen emissions, especially when you consider transportation and other pieces related to the sector. So as a result, one of the pieces that we will discuss this afternoon with the Air Commission is our proposal to set out sectoral targets, including for oil and gas, that will include a target reduction for oil and gas for 2025 and 2030. And that we're proposing a roughly 7 million ton reduction in the sector, which reflects a roughly 1/3 reduction for 2025, roughly 50% reduction in the 2030 timeframe. That's subject to further discussion. And then to make that happen, we're going to propose that we start a extensive stakeholder engagement process and solution-oriented approach that would probably start after your second round of mission change rulemaking later next month or early October, and after our rulemaking in September, and have that lead to significant oil and gas rulemaking next year in front of the the Air Quality Control Commission. That will also dovetail with our efforts to continue reducing emissions from the oil and gas sector. That's a place where we do have more regulatory authority than, for example, transportation, where there's federal preemption that affects the degree to which we can regulate automotive tailpipe standards. And then you're dealing with literally millions of consumers and their choices of automobile and fleet turnover. We're making steady, continuous progress there, but it's hard to kind of move as quickly. Whereas for this sector, oil and gas, the legislature has told us that we need to move quickly pursuant to 181. We know that we need to under 1261 and ozone compliance, and that's part of the conversation that we'll be having this afternoon. Gary, I don't know if you wanted to offer additional thoughts from the division's perspective, either on ozone or greenhouse gases or the proposed stakeholder process, but that's kind of where we're going. And then once Gary's had a chance, happy to take any questions.
Sure, I think you summarized it really well, John. You know, I guess just a couple of really high-level takeaways is certainly we do need to find significant reductions from oil and gas emissions for a variety of environmental reasons to meet our obligations under state and federal law. We've done a lot already. I think we've made a lot of progress in this sector. The operations from an air quality perspective that we see now are really far cleaner than the operations we saw when we started this 15 years ago. So, you know, we are hopeful that we're able to make further reductions. We think looking at the sector, there's further opportunities for cost-effective reductions in both methane and some of the other pollutants that may impact ozone or regional haze. So we think that there are really good opportunities for that. We also recognize that it's not going to be easy. You know, we don't have a bunch of low-hanging fruit that we're just waiting to pick. We're going to need to get to work to identify the best way to achieve those reductions. And so I think it's really critical that we have a very robust stakeholder process over the next year to have these discussions. I think one of the things that have grown out of our aggressive regulatory cycles over the last 4 or 5 years has really developed a very good stakeholder group with a lot of varied perspectives, whether it's from environmental groups, local governments, industry, who've been pretty keenly engaged in our processes. And so that gives us a real leg up as we step into this next round of efforts to reduce emissions, and specifically methane emissions for greenhouse gas purposes. So I think we're well poised, but I don't want to underestimate the challenges associated with this. You know, there's a lot of technical questions that'll need to be answered, a lot of policy questions, a lot of legal questions as we move forward. But you know, we are committed to having a very robust process to get to the very best answers, so we can both meet our environmental goals, but also do it in a technically feasible and cost-effective way.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman, for that, and thank you, Director Putnam, for your presentation as well. Do commissioners have questions for either individual?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner Messner.
Thank you. And thank you for that breadth of information over the last half hour. That was a lot to absorb in a very short period of time. And so forgive me if I didn't absorb everything that I was listening to. And so we'll certainly do my additional research moving forward here, and we'll participate in the discussion that's going to be happening this afternoon and moving forward. But I did have a couple of questions just to better inform myself. So help me understand the baseline information or the baseline cumulative impacts analysis that have been done by CDPHE or the Air Quality Control Commission up to this point that is helping inform some of the decisions that are starting to happen here through the different rulemaking processes, or at least maybe you can point me to where I can find that information so that I'm better understanding how the interplay between the different sources of emissions are being determined and therefore informing the processes for reducing those emissions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Messner. I can get started, and Gary or Leah can follow in. But we've had a number of tools that we use to track cumulative emissions from this sector, but really across the economy for our different purposes. So for a long time, we've had to collect inventory information for ozone compliance and other pollutants that in the past we've been out of compliance with federal standards for. And so as part of our state implementation process and compliance with federal regulations, we inventory emissions from pretty much everything, all the way from personal household cleaners to coal-fired power plants to cars and trucks, dry cleaners, marijuana facilities, and of course, oil and gas industry, but then also things like lawnmowers and construction equipment, all kinds of other sort of things, all of which contribute. We update that frequently, and I think one of the great challenges in this sector that's been a hot topic of conversation is how we transition from moving from some of the federal standards where you kind of calculate it based on a number of assumed emissions factors, often based on older data, to more Colorado-specific data. And so we've been in the process of trying to update that data based on a variety of sources, the information we collect. As Leah pointed out, we're going to be getting much richer data as part of the regulations that were passed by the AQCC in December. We're going to use the new resources we're getting as well as outside academic research to address that. And so that's a kind of work in progress, which it always has been, as you try to work to get better information to nail those things down. It relies on things like models. We don't have a sensor on every one of the multi-millions of cars on the road out there. We have to rely on assumptions about vehicle counts from CDOT, which then roll up into assumptions about how much emissions come from every car and so on and so forth. We're always trying to make those better. On the greenhouse gas side, for a number of years, the division has been using a federal tool to try to estimate emissions across Colorado. It's the so-called SIT tool, and use that to try to understand cumulative emissions of greenhouse gases. It's a good but not great tool, and one of the things that we're in the process now through rulemaking that happened in May that will require enhanced reporting of greenhouse gases, as well as the December rule specific to the oil and gas sector, and some of the other efforts that we're undertaking, is to really improve that assessment based on Colorado-specific information. One of the other things that we'll talk to the Air Commission about this afternoon, and have talked to them the last couple of months, is how we get on a sector or on a cycle of regular reporting and continuous improvements of those inventories so that we can account for the new data that we'll be getting in this sector. We account for changes in transportation. We account for coal plant closures that are accelerating, and provide regular touch base with the Air Commission at least annually to be able to kind of provide a sense, how are we doing against these deep reductions that we need to achieve? And, if we need to make adjustments, we make adjustments, and we kind of call that early rather than waiting until 2025 and see how we did. So it's a continuous process of trying to kind of improve the sources of data, trying to reduce the gaps in reporting of that data, and increase the kind of frequency of that data. And they're uneven. There are some areas, if you look at what are emissions from forest-related management or agriculture or other sort of things, those are generally not as robust a set of data as coal-fired power plants, where there are relatively few and we have continuous monitors on those. They're easy to attain. Oil and gas is somewhere in between. Clearly needs more progress to deploy a lot of the technology that's out there to improve our decision making. We're working quickly to implement that technology, but we're not all the way there yet, and that remains a big focus.
Thank you, Director Putnam. Commissioner Messner.
And thank you, Commissioner Putnam, for that. That was great, at least information for helping me understand and kind of the lay of the land as far as the different data points and the different paths forward that we're working on here. I did have just a couple of specific questions. So one of the things that Ms. Martland had talked about was utilizing different technologies to be flexible in the technologies being used as far as developing data. And does that affect the I guess the analysis as you're using all these different technologies, or not a consistent source of technology to monitor emissions, as you're trying to look to input it into kind of a baseline analysis or an overall analysis?
Commissioner Messner, that's a great question. And I'll start, and then maybe Ms. Martland or Mr. Kaufman will contribute. One of the challenges that we have is that there's an explosion in remote sensing, monitoring, and other sort of technology that is kind of exceeding our capacity to fully understand how accurate they are and how to compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and bananas to bananas. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is figure out how we can quickly address those issues. It's a big focus of the air quality enterprise, so that we can better understand what information are we getting from these various technologies. Some, like the monitoring sensors that Crestone Peak or others have put around their facilities are really good for detecting leaks and kind of changes or abnormalities that will provide early warning and better leak detection and reduce emissions. By themselves, they don't necessarily tell you that that facility is emitting X tons per year as opposed to Y tons per year. Those require different tools like the monitoring van, the aerial surveys, other sort of approaches that are out there. But it remains a challenge to precisely inventory methane. A lot of really good work is being done out of our research institutions in Colorado to try to use kind of top-down approaches while we're using bottom-up approaches to try to inventory those. But even with their work, the error bands are pretty sizable. And those are things that we need to kind of tighten up to be able to make sure that we're really making the best decisions for air quality as well as for the economy. And the state is investing in those efforts, and I think we're going to get good cooperation from state research institutions and federal labs, certainly the environmental community and industry, because I think everybody is best served by having the best information and tightening up those error bands to, get a better sense. I don't know, Ms. Martland or Mr. Kaufman, if you've got additional thoughts on that, but it's a major focus of ours right now.
I would just add and build on that the technologies are undergoing rapid development and testing, and there's a lot of really good and really cool work going on to do these comparisons of the technologies, but they have different abilities versus quantification, qualification. There's a lot of questions to be answered, and so this is a first step to try to answer some of those questions. You can have a monitoring program that tells you about methane, about hazardous air pollutants, about ozone precursors, and they would all potentially use different monitoring technologies. And so it is going to be a challenge to compare some of that data and see how it can be used, but this is a we think really important first step to start to answer some of those questions, or at least help refine what questions we are trying to answer.
Mr. Kaufman, did you have anything to add?
No, I think Leah covered it great.
Great. Commissioner Messner, anything more?
Yeah, just one last question, and thank you very much for that. Once again, very informative. My last question, and this is one that I'm struggling with in my mind, so I apologize for thinking aloud here. But clearly, as I'm looking at that, I mean, there's a responsibility, a requirement for the Air Quality Control Commission, CDPHE, to have a regulatory process for emissions. And then there's also a responsibility that was given to the COGCC to do some similar things. And so I guess and that creates layers of regulation and potential duplication or not. So I was just curious, thoughts from you all on how this kind of dual regulatory approach to air quality or emissions is going to happen between CDPHE and COGCC.
Thank you, Commissioner Messner. I can get started on that. I think the first critical step is strong communication to make sure that we understand, what the two agencies are doing. And, in particularly from our perspective, as we're working towards assessing the cuts and other sort of things that are necessary to meet our greenhouse gas targets, to meet our ozone standards and other environmental objectives, conveying that information to you in as real time as we can, as well as to the general public, is essential. And that's part of the process and cadence that we're working to set up, and make sure that you're seeing the information about ozone and our plans, and the kind of reductions we think we'll need to get there, as well as the targets that we need to set and hit for greenhouse gas reductions, to make sure that as part of your work, you're aligning to what we're doing and we're aligning to what you're doing on that front. There is overlap in Senate Bill 181 in terms of your guidance to protect public health, safety, environment, et cetera, as well as our guidance to minimize emissions and then meet particular targets on greenhouse gases. And one of the things that I think we talk about at staff is try to avoid inconsistencies, duplication, and then figure out who's in the best position to do those sorts of things. I think given the direction we have to kind of, and by we, I mean the department and AQCC, to chart out this course to compliance with the 1261 greenhouse gas targets, and to achieve the, the reductions that we need for ozone. Those are places that it makes sense, I think, for us to take the lead and then, provide you with that information to inform your decision making about particular permits or comprehensive planning or other sort of elements. Could make the same argument about water quality or waste or other sort of places where we have a strong statutory role, and then make sure that we're trying to dovetail to the extent that we can, which I think will lead to better regulation, better results, and lower overall costs.
I see that Director Murphy has visually joined us. Is that a cue? Do you want to add or provide perspective?
Yes, Chair, I think I would like to offer a little bit in that space. And just a little bit of a historical perspective with my work with both CRGCC as well as CDPHE and air quality historically, is that we've run, I think, in tandem, and have closely coordinated in terms of meetings and chats, but haven't really integrated into each other's rulemaking processes nearly as deeply as we have over the course of the last year. And I think it's because of some of the points that Executive Director or Commissioner Putnam made with regard to kind of the broadening of our authority and us exploring how we can ensure that we provide kind of seamless continuity of regulatory oversight and not creating conflicts. And so I think the best example I have of our coordination and how that's working is that we've been meeting with CDPHE's air team for a year now, very specifically on what CRGCC should be working on in this space and can be working on in this space that's complementary to CDPHE's initiatives without creating unnecessary duplication or conflict, so that we don't leave our stakeholder, our regulated community in the space of picking with whom they want to comply and leaving them, at risk with the other divisions. So we've worked very, very closely, and I think that one of the reasons we needed to slow down the 900 series rulemaking process and pulled it out of the 2 through 600 is to allow more of these conversations to evolve and develop with CDPHE and Air Quality Control Division in particular. So we've been extremely attuned to it in the last year in a way that I haven't seen in my 7 years working with the Commission. And I think it is a reflection of us really trying to find complementary roles in that space. So Commissioner Putnam, I don't know if you want to correct anything that I've said, but wanted to acknowledge the coordination that has taken place to set us up for the next rulemaking.
Director Murphy, I think that's absolutely right. And, given the lean government that we have to operate in Colorado, given our, constitutional, budgetary, and other sort of pieces, we have to work together to maximize results. And I think it's been really gratifying to see the kind of alignment and hard work to try to make sure that we're pooling resources towards a common aim. And, those aims are really enshrined in Senate Bill 181 to achieve the outcomes that we're looking at. And for us, the minimization of emissions requires, careful look by COGCC at the rules relating to venting and electrification of equipment, other sort of things that I'm sure will come up in further rulemakings. And, we hope to be able to provide better information to help inform those decisions.
Thank you, Director Putnam. Other commissioners with questions for the panel? Commissioner Nanjapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for that excellent presentation. It was very informative and very helpful. Really appreciate the depth in which you went into the different matters that you're dealing with. I had a question that was somewhat similar, kind of piggybacking onto Commissioner Messner's, and it sounds like in trying to meet these targets for reduction, you said that there would be stakeholder engagement and some ongoing discussions, and it also sounds like you have there's a good suite of tools to monitor, getting better at the comparability and the data quality, et cetera. What is the current state of the art for technology for meeting those targets for reducing emissions? Do we know what's out there, or is it readily available, fairly accurate? And maybe this is beyond your scope for each of you, but just curious if you can comment on any of that.
Well, yeah, and I can take a shot at that. It really depends on the source. For one of the challenges with the oil and gas industry is that there's so many different kinds of sources, and I think Commissioner Putnam mentioned it. There's lots of different leaks from all sorts of different places across 50,000 facilities, and so that can create a real challenge. I think we have really good information about sort of ongoing operational pieces of equipment, so engines or the tanks or dehydrators or the stuff that's manufactured, has good understanding of emission rates. As you start to get into some of the information about things that are what we call irregular or intermittent type sources, like leaks, like venting of equipment that's for maintenance purposes, well maintenance emissions, those are less well understood. And as Leah mentioned, one of the things that we put into our rulemaking in December was a much more comprehensive inventory requirement. We've typically inventoried these ongoing pieces of equipment and emission sources, haven't done as good a job in the past inventorying the intermittent type things. So, we really took a very comprehensive approach and said, what are all the different ways that emissions can come out of the oil and gas sector, whether it happens every day, once a year, once every 3 years at a particular site. We're going to make people report that to us. We haven't started to get the data, but we'll start to get that next year. So I think that will be very helpful for us to understand, are there gaps in our understanding about what the emission sources are? And then we follow a pretty consistent approach. Is we start with figuring out, what are the largest emission sources? This inventorying efforts are really going to help on that with some of these irregular emission sources. And then we start, once we've identified those, then we'll start to look at, well, what are the technologies or operational practices that you can engage in or put into place to reduce those emissions? And then finally, we'll look at, once we've got technically feasible options, then look at the economics of it and, how much bang for your buck do you get? And we typically do things on a cost per ton basis. And then based on all that, we'll come up with a regulatory package. So, it's, the answer to your question really is it's sort of all over the board. It all depends on the emission source. I wish I had a more satisfying answer, but some things we know very well, others not as well. I think we're in a good place in terms of moving forward. And then the other piece is doing, rather than looking at on a source by source basis, is really looking at concentrations in the atmosphere to better understand. Now that could be from a lot of different sectors, but Commissioner Putnam mentioned Senate Bill 204, which established an air quality enterprise, which is going to allow us to do a lot more basic scientific research, which will, a lot of that will be focused on doing these top-down analyses, and that will serve as a check on our bottom-up analyses on a piece-by-piece, equipment-by-equipment basis to understand, are those two things lining up? What is what we're seeing in the atmosphere consistent with what we're inventorying? And then if it's not, that will, prompt another iteration of doing a better job on the inventorying. But it will be an ongoing process. We're a lot smarter than we were when we started. We're a lot smarter than we were 5 years ago, but we still need to get smarter about what the emission sources are and then what potential controls we could use to reduce those sources.
And thank you, Commissioner Nanjapa, and thank you, Director Kaufman. Agree, and glad to see your cat is joining you again. But I think, I just wanted to provide a couple of examples that this is a process that we are able to use new information to kind of feed into our process of both improving inventories and improving regulations. So Ms. Martland had mentioned an element of the rulemaking related to the Class 2 injection wells and, making sure that we had firm controls on there. That arose, from some indications that we had from the academic community and a mobile monitoring van that University of Wyoming has that found that there were some emissions near some of those facilities that upon further investigation reflected that they didn't have the same controls that we had. And so that's a place where we use the technology, we use the data to kind of improve our understanding, take action and plug those holes and reduce overall emissions. Similarly, Ms. Martland mentioned and Dr. Kaufman mentioned addressing some of these well unloading issues. Some of the work that's been done with aerial surveys in other states had found that was a large source of emissions, irregular. It happens irregularly. It doesn't come out of a dehydrator or an engine or something else that's relatively observable. But it makes a big difference both locally and cumulatively. And so, based on some of that new information, we were able to, address that through regulation. And then we're going to be able to see that through the satellite, aerial, other sort of tools that we're looking at. And so, really approaching this as an iterative process to better our understanding so that we get to fully smart rather than smarter than we were. And it's a process, and it's not just in the sector, but this is one that it's been a particular challenge and has required us to really focus the time, the intention, and the resources to be able to fill in those gaps.
Thank you, Director Putnam. Commissioner Njaba?
I just wanted to thank you both for those responses. And just a quick follow-up was just making sure that I'm sort of understanding. So there's regular sources of emissions that maybe from engines, et cetera, as you mentioned, that are a little bit easier to manage because that's something that you can put in place with the equipment, or something of that nature where it's a little bit more predictable, easier to manage in that way. But the irregular sources are the ones that are obviously difficult to predict and harder to manage. And so it sounds like the strategy is then to try to intercept those types of irregular emissions more quickly and be able to get on top of them. Is that kind of the gist of the strategy?
Director Kaufman?
Yeah, I think the starting point is to really quantify what those emissions are, and so that's what's in process now. It's not that we haven't done anything. I mean, we've had some rules in place for the well unloading events to require some best management practices, but I think we've been hampered by a lack of information about what is the extent of the problem, and so by doing better inventory work coming out of the 2019 rulemaking, I think we're going to be able to answer that question. I mean, you're still going to need an emission reduction technique, and once you quantify the problem, then you still need to find a way to, if it's a significant one, to reduce the emissions, and that will be a challenge as well. And it will all just really depend on what the emission source is. Some may be easier to handle. Some may have more readily available control technologies or operational practice that could eliminate or reduce the emissions. Some may be more challenging. We have seen a lot of development in the industry in terms of how they build their facilities, the overall design, which has made them kind of inherently less emitting, overall, and provide just less emission points, which is really ultimately what you want. You want more of a closed loop system for an industry like this, where there's all these opportunities for leaks or vents. So that will be part of the process too. It's helpful for the industry folks to realize how much emissions are coming out of different sources, and then they're able to design and engineer a little better than the old facilities are.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate all of the information. And it's a big task that you all are taking on. So really appreciate all the thought and effort that you're putting into it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other commissioners with any questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Director Putnam, Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Hackett, Ms. Martland. Really appreciate your presentation to us, our 100 participants that are listening in at this moment. This has been very good and helpful information. So with that, Ms. Larson, I believe that next on the agenda is public comment. Is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Commissioners, do you want to move into public comment? It's 10:28. We've been going at it for an hour and a half. Do you want to take a few-minute break before we move into public comment? What's your pleasure?
Mr. Chair, I'd suggest we take a quick 5-minute break.
Okay, let's do that. Let's reconvene at 10:35. It'll be 6.5 minutes. All right, it looks like we've got commissioners back on board. We will reconvene our meeting and we are moving into public comment. Ms. Larson, I think I had the list, but now I can't seem to find it. So can you work on calling folks out? And I
Certainly.
believe that Mr. Kirby Nguyen is again first in line as a local official from Weld County, and he would have 5 minutes.
That is correct. Mr. Nguyen, give us a moment. We will unmute you and get you ready.
Okay, have you got the video as well?
We see a bear.
I don't know what's going on. It used to work right. Y'all changed your settings and haven't figured out how to get the video going. Anyway, my name is Kirby Nguyen. I work for Garfield County as oil and gas liaison. I'm just here briefly today speaking on behalf of Garfield County and our Western and Rural Local Government Coalition that will be participating in the rulemaking. Again, we just want to reiterate, we appreciate the full-time attention of you all, the new commissioners, to the important issues raised by the rulemaking parties. And I'm sure you're feverishly reading through all of our various pleadings and filings, and we appreciate that. We definitely look forward to working with you to hold a fair and productive rulemaking hearing in the 200 to 600 series docket beginning next week. I would note that on behalf of our 23 local government coalition and many parties we hear from, we are definitely struggling to stay on track and be prepared for really it's 3 simultaneous overlapping rulemakings over the next 2 months and more even after that, all while we're also preparing, of course, for lengthy virtual hearings beginning next week. But we're all sort of in the same boat on that, I guess. Maybe y'all just have 2 rulemakings coming up, but a lot of us parties are actually navigating an Air Quality Control Commission in 2 years at the same time. So with that, that's all I wanted to say. And again, we appreciate y'all and we look forward to working with you next week. If the chair wants to award me a couple extra minutes that I left on the table today, next week, that'd be just fine. And if not, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen, for your comments. We appreciate your continued presence here. I did find the sign-up list, Ms. Larson, so I'll do my best to work through it. I believe that Edward Ingvey is next on the agenda. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Ingvey, we are going to find you and unmute you, and you will have 3 minutes to present your testimony.
Okay, I don't know if you can hear me. My internet's saying it's going unstable.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I say my name is Ed Ingvey, and I own a small oil and gas company called Renegade Oil and Gas Company. I've been operating in Colorado for over 33 years, which is probably prior to when most of you moved to Colorado. I have been directly or indirectly employing tens of Colorado citizens. And throughout that 33-year period as well, I've paid millions of dollars of local tax dollars, mostly to small-scale tax districts. There's so many topics and so little time, but today I'm gonna focus in, I guess, on what we heard this morning. Let's start with what the CDPHE didn't talk about this morning. How many people here realize that over 70% of Colorado's ozone population come from out of state? Whatever we adopt for state regulations will have very little impact on Colorado's ozone problem due to the out-of-state sourcing and Colorado's unique topography. An EPA waiver is available to counter and cover this, but is not being pursued. I challenge you to question CDPHE about this. John Putnam, the Director of Environmental Programs, has been caught off mic stating this. So this is no longer about controlling ozone, but about using your regulatory authority to destroy an industry you don't like because of the hierarchy in the state. Regulatory expansion is always most difficult on small operators like myself. There has been lots of public discussion about the difference between urban and rural oil and gas operations. I would like to distinguish this even a little bit more to small scale legacy type development and large scale multi-million-dollar well pad development. Regulation have killed traditional older style oil and gas development. Perhaps that's the goal of many on this commission. This will lead to only large companies surviving. Regulatory costs of doing a $150 million pad in Weld County versus a single $250,000 4,000-foot well and exploration project in Powers County are completely different. They are not the same thing, but nothing is being done to differentiate that in those type of projects in the regulations. This amounts to a takings of mineral rights that are that need to be developed with the traditional style development. There are reasons why many main streets across this country are dying and Walmarts and Costco's are thriving. And a big part of it is ever increasing regulations. You must take that into consideration. On another note, this virtual rulemaking does not work for small operators. The amount of time and necessary to follow everything that's going on is extreme. It's extremely unfair for small operators to try to keep track over all of it, and it's completely overwhelming. We also know that the oil and gas trade organizations will throw the small operators under the bus to get what they need. Just because it might work for you, it doesn't mean that it works for everybody right now.
Mr. Ing, if you could wrap up.
Okay, at best it's clunky, at worst it's immoral. And I would just suggest you stop throwing small operators under the bus, even if it is an electric bus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ingve, for your comments. I would note to you and to the rest of the public that we continue to have an opportunity for written comments. So if you feel like you're not able to fully get your points across, please do go to our website and submit written comments for the record. Thank you very much. Next, we have JB Condell. Is that right?
Yes.
It looks like Mr. or Ms. Condell, I'm not sure, but you are unmuted and you have 3 minutes.
And Mr. Chair, one moment. Mr. Condell actually is calling in on a telephone, so we will locate that phone number. One moment.
This is JB. Do you hear me?
We do hear you. Go ahead.
I'm JB Condell. I'm with Renegade Oil and Gas Company, and I've been with Renegade for 28 years. The issue that I and many other people have with SB 181 is the premise that oil and gas in Colorado is operating unsafely and unprotective of. This is wholly untrue. Greg Duranlo gave a very good presentation on the Form 2A. First, he talked about all of the rulemakings that have occurred in the past 13 years, rulemakings that have consistently strengthened the regulatory oversight in Colorado, strengthened it so much that Colorado is widely acknowledged as having the most rigorous regulations in the country. He talked about the 2A process, the amount of work done by the operator prior to submitting the form, and the amount of interaction between the operator, staff, local governments, and affected stakeholders during the review process. He spoke about conditions of approval. He spoke about alternative locations. Kirby Wynn has provided comment about how permitting works in Garfield County. He spoke about the interaction between the operator, the county, and the public. The hearings that are held and the hours spent discussing myriad of issues regarding the siting and other matters of local concern. He spoke about how a local government plays its role in the process, and he spoke about alternative location analysis. And the wellbore integrity rulemaking was really nothing more than codifying the industry's day-to-day standard operating procedures for wellbore construction and protection of fresh water, procedures that the industry has employed for decades. These are but 3 examples of how the industry has always operated in Colorado, how it has always been protective of, and all before SB 181. So no matter how all this plays out, no matter what you do, no matter how Colorado moves forward, hydrocarbons will continue to power our lives for decades to come. I certainly don't think that Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, or Texas are going to end their oil and gas industries anytime soon. As I said in my written comments on the mill levy rulemaking, please be very careful of what you wish for. Good day.
Thank you, Mr. Kondo, for those comments. I believe we now have Eric Sanford.
Yes, this is Eric Sanford. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you, Mr. Sanford. Please begin.
Thank you. I'm an operations and land manager for a small E&P company on the Western Slope for the last dozen years, and I make these comments personally, not on behalf of a company or organization. The current Colorado administration's efforts to regulate oil and gas out of Colorado using 181 will have real and negative impacts. Under 181, I believe you need to ask yourself if any specific new rule or regulation is rationally related to the harm that such rule or regulation is intended to avoid or prevent. Based on my reading of proposed and adopted new rules, such a rational relationship does not exist for most of the new regulations under 181. Regulation for the sole purpose of having a regulation is nonsensical. Consider two impacts to reduce oil and gas development in Colorado that will result from 181. First, oil and gas investment dollars will move to adjacent states. Utah, New Mexico, and Wyoming, for example, will benefit from this shift in investment capital. But to what end? How does this shift in investment benefit the citizens of Colorado? I don't think it does. Secondly, there's been very little discussion in this process about the impacts to mineral owners across this state. As future oil and gas development is intentionally stymied under 181, many ranchers, farmers, and other landowners who rely on income from oil and gas royalties will be impacted. Intentionally limiting development under 181 will decrease these royalty payments and income significantly over time. I've spent my career in oil and gas managing development on the Western Slope. The Western Slope does have unique development, regulatory, and compliance issues that must be addressed with distinct rules. For example, I have not heard one clear response from COGCC to date regarding how federal NEPA processes will be integrated into COGCC permitting, compliance, and regulatory processes. Most of the federally managed oil and gas development in Colorado occurs on the Western Slope. This is a real and immediate conflict. The oil and gas industry welcomes rational regulation, but in reality, many in the oil and gas industry understand that the current process of implementing 181 is merely a veiled political effort to cripple this industry. Because this process to adopt new rules under 181 is primarily a politically driven process and not a science-based process, the outcomes will reflect these current political divisions. This will not benefit the citizens of Colorado in any tangible way and will lead to continuing conflict and continuing disinvestment in Colorado. From my perspective as an oil and gas operator, this process is merely a political charade with predetermined outcomes. Governor Polis and the opposition industry want to drive oil and gas out of Colorado. Rules developed under 181 are merely the vehicle they're using to achieve this goal. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford, for your comments. We now have Brian Williams signed up, and Mr. Williams will have 3 minutes as well once we get him unmuted.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can, Mr. Williams. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. So I would just want to say, first of all, I really appreciate this dialogue today between CDPHE and COGCC. I'm glad that you did this publicly. I wish you guys would do this more often. This is incredibly informative, and I just want you to know that we all really do appreciate this. What I would encourage the commission is to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This technology for monitoring and evaluating missions, it's existed for a while now, and it's not perfect. It's not perfect, and there is room for improvement, but science is inherently a continuous process of improvement, right? We wouldn't be able to regulate or do much of anything if we demanded perfection for everything. So let's just take a step back and make good quality, measured, reasonable assumptions and work from those, because that's what's worked in the past, and we can continue to make progress that way. The other piece too is that this commission, you know what Senate Bill 181 demands, you know what public health, what environmental justice demands. And, you know, the industry, they're not in charge, you are. The people are in charge. And so I would encourage this commission to take this role to set the standard and let the markets rise to the challenge, right? Set those standards, and if corporations aren't able to meet those challenges, aren't able to meet those standards and prove it, and they don't really have business operating within Colorado. You know, to the point of some of the regulators, this is really an opportunity to do something for public health and all Coloradans. And as far as the operators are concerned, you know, they say it's not that's not fair to small operators, but I'd ask, what about individual people, right? The operators, this is what they do day in and day out. Individual people in every waking hour. So this, I think, is really an opportunity to help those folks out. You know, no one operator thinks that they're responsible for pollution or climate change, and they're not, but together they make a serious impact. And I would just encourage them and this commission to set an example of leadership that the federal government can follow, because we're not getting that right now from the White House. We're not getting that at the federal level. So, you know, follow Senate Bill 181, follow the example of Colorado citizens, and I hope we'll continue to see this dialogue with CDPHE in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We appreciate your commentary. At this point,
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can.
The next couple weeks as we go forward with this. My name is Andrew Forkus Goodmanson. I'm the Deputy Director of the League of Oil and Gas Impacted Coloradans. I appreciate this opportunity to make a public comment in front of all of you today. I also sincerely appreciate the effort that all of you have been undergoing throughout this rulemaking. I can't imagine the monumental amount of work that it has been to read and process all of these various filings from all of the 100 parties and tens of thousands of Coloradans that have been paying attention to this process. I say actually that I can't imagine it, but I've been actually quite able to imagine it since I've been trying to do the same thing myself, and it has been quite difficult. So I appreciate that effort, and I wish you all the best of luck going forward. I wanted to focus my comments today on the very important topic of public comments. I believe that in the spirit of SB 181, it is extremely important that everyday Coloradans feel empowered to participate in the regulatory processes that impact them on a daily basis. And I have been both encouraged and frustrated by the thus far efforts of the COGCC to incorporate public comments into this proceeding. There has been a marked improvement in the ability of in the intention of the commission to accept public comment. The existence of these public comment portals has been of great help. The ability of or allowing people to submit public comments by email has been a great help. However, there's been an issue of transparency and general issues of confusion in the public about who's receiving these public comments, what's being done with them, and what purpose they're serving. I work regularly with members of the public who are engaged in this process or want to be engaged in this process. And every single day I get questions from them about where their comments have gone. I've had comments with several COGCC staff members and have gotten slightly different answers at slightly different times throughout this process, and that certainly hasn't helped. So I would just like to request today that you as commissioners make an effort to get the comments that have been submitted to the COGCC in various formats, since this rulemaking was just the barest glimmer of hope in all of our eyes following the passage of SB 181. Hundreds of comments have been submitted through portals, and I'm not sure how many emails the DNR public comment email address has received, but I know it's more than those that exist in the Google Drive folders right now. So I would just ask for a little bit of clarity around that issue, and that the COGCC make clear to those who have submitted public comments that their comments are being heard by their intended target, which is you as the commissioners and decision makers. And finally, I hope that we do get to hear from CDPHE about the health impact study as a part of this rulemaking process. I believe that an explanation from the drafters of that study about what the study is and what it says about the impacts of oil and gas, hearing from the horse's mouth, as it were, would be very important. And I hope we get the opportunity to have that presentation in public as a part of this rulemaking proceeding. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Forrest-Gudmundsson. Hearings Officer Larson, Attorney General Minor, do either of you want to comment about the public comment?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I can speak to portions of it, and then I would likely turn to Mr. Minor to advise the public and the commissioners on the record and what that means from a legal perspective. Administratively, we are processing the public comments that are coming in on our rulemaking email address. We posted, probably a month or so, if not more ago, on our website, how the public can submit written public comments to the commission. To date, we have been keeping up on getting those public comments into the commission portfolio. The staff member who's been tasked with addressing that had a loss in their family, so they've been on bereavement leave for a bit. So potentially we're a little far behind on that, so apologies for that. But please note that those comments are being posted. The deadline for posting or for submitting public comment, written public comment, is this Wednesday, August the 19th at 5 p.m. We had originally stated that the public would have until last August 15th at 5 p.m. to submit written public comment. That deadline was extended. The notice of that extension was in a case management order that went to all parties in the rulemaking. It was also posted on our website. So we are still accepting public comment. With respect to the portals, yes, those portals were opened back in 2019, and we did receive quite a bit of public comment. The portals themselves were closed at a point once we began opening up the dockets on these rulemakings. Those public comments are still available on our website. They're available to the commissioners, and they are part of the administrative record. And I can now turn it over to Mr. Minor to discuss a little bit more what that administrative record looks like.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. As you stated, all public comments that are submitted formally through the procedures that Ms. Larson mentioned will be included as part of the administrative record for this rulemaking. That is required by the Colorado Administrative Procedure Act. The specific citation is Colorado Revised Statute 244103, section 8.1b3, which does provide that all written comments received by the agency as of the date of the hearing on the rule will be included in the administrative record. So certainly they will be part of the record. And as Ms. Larson mentioned, there are numerous ways available for not only the commissioners themselves, but also the commission staff to review and ensure that the ideas expressed in those comments are considered as part of the rulemaking.
Thank you both for that clarification. Just to sort of summarize, everyone's got until 5 o'clock tomorrow to get their final public written comments in, and they can still sign up to present orally on August 24th, which is our initial public comment hearing on the rulemaking. So is that correct? Did I get that right, Ms. Larson?
Yes, and just a reminder, the sign-up sheet for oral public comment on the 24th does close tomorrow at 5 p.m. The reason we need to close it at 5 p.m. is in order for us to be able to plan out the hearing and identify who's going to be speaking and get that lined up.
Great. And we encourage folks to sign up, both written comment and public comment orally on the rulemaking that we're doing. So, okay, I think we had one other individual that had signed up, Roger Steen, for public comment. So if we could locate Mr. Steen and get him unmuted, we will look forward to hearing from him.
Mr. Steen, you are unmuted.
I'm looking for a response from somebody that you can hear me.
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. All right, Roger Steen, my name. I'm a retired air pollution engineer, and I am from Routt County, which of course is northwest Colorado. This morning we discussed the need for more data collection on emissions from the oil and gas industry and possibly the effects on humans. This need for more data will always be true, no matter how much data we collect on emissions and health effects. But we now need to make current decisions on rules that are being currently developed. And I'm pointing out that we have to use currently available data. For a moment, I want to refocus on the most current health risk assessment available, and that is the APCD health study released October 2019, commissioned by APCD, called Human Health Risk Assessment for Oil and Gas Operations in Colorado. The study is directly related to the need, happens to be directly related to the need for setbacks of these operations from humanly occupied buildings. Setbacks is the issue, is one of the issues. This is the best study currently available from which to make these current decisions. In my opinion, it makes the indisputable case that 500 meters is too small. We need to work with the current data to figure out a larger setback distance. Perhaps you've heard this loud and clear already from the morning presentations, but I'd like to note that the current emission rules for oil and gas do not limit the emissions from oil and gas operations. They only limit the permitted emissions and only require that leaks be repaired, leaks which are in fact allowed by the rules. These leaks can be small, they can be large, they can be for an hour, they can be for 6 months. There is no quantifiable limit on leaks. And until there is, the rules should recognize this uncertainty in emissions related specifically to BTEX and other toxic emissions. Until the industry demonstrates that these emissions are no longer uncertain, the rules really should include a margin of safety. And again, relating this to setbacks, 500 feet is too small a setback for residents. I ask you to consider something a good bit larger, perhaps 2,000 feet. Switching slightly to a comment that Commissioner Murphy made regarding the need for the agencies to work in a more coordinated fashion. That's CDPHE and COGCC. We view some of the actions from the compliance end, and we have had issues. We're having one currently, right as of today, with the ability to discuss, to try to figure out a compliance issue. And we still are having a good bit of trouble trying to get any response back from the agencies. And I hope that this can be worked out. From a compliance perspective, there still needs to be more effort focused on this industry. So that's it for now.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you for your commentary, and we would encourage you to provide us with written commentary and or sign up for testimony on the rulemaking on August 24th. Ms. Larson, does that conclude public comment from those who signed up?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. Okay, moving on then, since we've already done a break, we can just keep moving forward. I think next on the agenda is report from Director Murphy. Hi, I see you again. Good to see you. Do you have a report for us?
I do have a fairly brief one. I'd alluded to the fact that we, at the commission level, are not only tasked with supporting the efforts to implement the mission change rulemaking, but are also carrying out our day-to-day business. So I wanted to circle back to that and provide a little bit more detail to the commissioners and the public about what it is that has been keeping us busy recently. So I would be remiss if I did not start by saying thank you to Sean Hackett and Leah Martland for your detailed presentations, and Commissioner Putnam for your insights into how our two organizations can continue to coordinate. I think we have a lot to do together, and I look forward to helping support CDPHE and its initiatives, whether it's informally through participating in your processes or more formally in working through proposed draft rules for the consideration of either or Water Quality Commission or Solid and Hazardous Waste Commission, right? So I value that partnership and look forward to that coordination. Jumping back into more of the operations update, as I said last time, COGCC is continuing to work from home through at least January 1st, pursuant to Executive Director Dan Gibbs' directive to the Department of Natural Resources. We will be doing a 3-week virtual hearing, as a reminder for anyone who maybe hasn't heard that yet this century. And then we have another 2-week hearing through the end of September and beginning of October to pick up the 800, 900, and 1200 series rules. With all of this, all of our field operations, permitting, environmental engineering groups continue to work simultaneously during the hearings. We had an all-staff meeting earlier this month that was a great opportunity, I think, for us to reconnect virtually, and started with an acknowledgement that working remotely is difficult, and all of us are under an increasing amount of strain and stress due to things like a pandemic beyond our control. Many of us are also dealing with a pretty intense wildfire season. So it's just an acknowledgement that this is what we're doing is hard work, and it has some overlying issues that make it more complicated. That being said, what we are doing in the way of our day-to-day operations remains impressive to me. Our finance unit, to kick things off, worked very closely with our orphan well program to increase our spending in that program, I think almost threefold, from $1.4 million to $4.3 million. We also have had a lot of transition in the finance unit, and I'm pleased to announce that Jarrett Ellis will be joining CRGCC next week as our budget and finance manager. We're excited to have him on board. He comes to us from Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and apologies for poaching one of your rising stars, but we're really excited to have him on board and continue managing COGCC's finances in a stable manner despite a volatile market. So moving now to the engineering unit, this is Dave Andrews' team and covers both engineering and orphan well programs. As I alluded to, the orphan well program has tripled its workload over the last year and is set to continue that spending level for the next couple of years, which is just really important work that needs to get done. In addition, the engineering team administers 10 different forms and has processed thousands of forms over the course of the last year. We're digging in and also supporting most specifically the wellbore integrity rulemaking this year. Looking at our field operations team, it's been a very busy year for this team, and as an indicator of that, our July 2020 inspections were up over our July 19 inspections by about 100 well inspections. We inspected over 2,600 wells in July 2020 and 2,500 in July 19. Turning next to the permitting unit, permitting and technological services, they are really the glue that holds us all together, and they have supported not only monumental changes in how we're processing forms, but also starting to develop the form templates and form changes necessary to support the staff's proposed rules, in addition to creating map layers available to our public and stakeholders so that they can see what it is, what's going on, and what is happening. To be very precise, the permitting team has processed over 13,000 forms this year, and that's an average of over 1,100 per person. It's an incredible volume of work, and to say that COVID hasn't slowed us down is illustrated by that volume. The environmental unit are continuing to review permits under the objective criteria. The OGLA team that has done this work has had a very dynamic year as we've adjusted to permitting within 181 and has moved as every change has been required of it to continue to, through the lens of 181, review permits applied to the commission. And then the environmental team just continues to do the hard work that they've always done in keeping our field cleaned up and addressing and remediation some spills. So it's really been an honor to work with this team for the many years I've been with them, and especially over the past year. I think that they've shown through very well. So I wanted to just give an overview of kind of what we've been doing the past year and provide some of the more detailed statistics. Happy to take any questions, but that's it. And I'm grateful for everybody's attention and participation, and we're going to get to spend a whole heck of a lot of time together in the coming few weeks, which is just a wonderful opportunity and also a little daunting. So
great, thank you, Director Murphy. It's always great to hear about what's happening day to day on the ground at Commission. You know, having been in your spot for 18 months, I echo all the things you say that that the employees are doing yeoman's work in the COVID-19 pandemic, and that, you know, as you noted there, that, you know, the number of field inspections in July of 2020 was greater than July of 2019. That's a testament to the great work of Mike Leonard and his group, and all the groups I know continue to do just amazing jobs. We're fortunate to have such great employees at COGCC. And you know, I've said this before, but you know, not only on the day-to-day stuff, but in all the rulemaking that they're helping us with, that we commissioners are vigorously and robustly working through, so that we're prepared to initiate this rulemaking next Monday. Gosh, it's less than a week away. Do any of the commissioners have questions for Director Murphy? Okay. Seeing no one unmute themselves, we'll move to the next thing on our agenda, and that is the consent agenda. And we had, I think, one item on the consent agenda. Did anyone have any questions? And if not, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'll motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Gonzalez, with a second from Mr. Messner. Seeing no one with questions, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, at this point, we are to commissioner comments, which is the last item on our agenda. Does anyone care to provide any comments amongst ourselves? I know we're all anxious to dive back into our homework to get ready for next week. Commissioner Nanjapa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo what you were just saying regarding the staff at COGCC, and I am guessing this has been the same for my other fellow commissioners, but the knowledge and the expertise that they bring in answering our questions and what they've been putting into the draft rules. And I've just been skimming earlier this morning the latest draft rules, and I think they've been very attentive to comments, and you know, encourage folks to take a look at all of that. But I think that it's just an amazing amount of work and thought, and just a lot of care going into the development of these rules, and listening to what folks have said. And so I just want to express that appreciation and let the public know as well that there is a lot of reading and evaluating and reevaluating going on behind the scenes, and it's very apparent to me, and I just really appreciate it. And it doesn't make our job any easier, but it is very helpful.
Hear, hear. All right. Seeing no other commissioners, it looks like that we are at the end of our agenda. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We will look forward to seeing you all on Monday, I believe, and we start at 10:30. Is that right? No, or earlier?
We start earlier. There will be a staff presentation, I believe
Starting
at 9 a.m.
9
And then
a.m.
we'll,
Okay,
yeah.
great. All right. Bye, everybody. See you Monday.